wonderful guy,
Good.
wonderful friend. I heard he had passed and that he was gone. But he's not really gone.
No.
He's here. He's all around us. We can feel him in many, many ways because he touched so many people in so many ways. We heard about his earlier exploits with his music in Malibu, and we're probably going to hear from people that were in his artistic world too. And also he had another world of his website, a very active, interactive website, mainly with the old surfing crowd. And I'm part of that old crowd. Tom and I met when we each started surfing in Malibu when we were teenagers. And this was in the mid-50s, ancient times. Those were, at that time, Gidget was created. Does anyone here remember that Gidget sort of thing that happened, and then surfing became very, very exciting and very, very widely known over the years. So I was drawn into Tom's world, and he, when we were teenagers, catching waves, chasing beach girls, but what I learned from him, and I think probably all of us have learned this, is the way that that he could do things beyond the ordinary. He could enjoy and play and be just sort of out of the box. A lot of humor, a lot of jokes, a lot of practical jokes like we just heard. In his early surfing days, there were practical jokes like that. We had, the Surf Rats took a number of trips down to Mexico to ride the waves. So he taught me, and I think quite a few other people, how to be aware of what other people's worlds are and to respect those worlds, to accept them. And I don't recall from those surfing times and the times that I've kept up with him, and after I met my wife 58 years ago, she became part of the group that knew Tom back in those days, and we kept in touch through his musical days, through his art days, through his sculpting, his painting, kept in touch all this time. I sort of represent, I guess, those early surfing days. Actually, Gidget was hoping to come today. She's still kicking. She's still there. She's in her 80s.
Yeah, she told me that her husband's sick.
Yeah, her husband's not doing too well right now, but she was hoping to come up, so, and share some memories too. All those years, I don't recall any disparaging words about someone else, about some other surfer. There might have been a couple exceptions. Tom might have had strong words about someone who cut him off of a fast wave. Strong words, but very few. And that's what we remember about him. He's still here. And I'm glad I could share this time with all of you, because I'm sure all of you feel the same way I did about him, about how exceptional he was, and what a fine character he still is, right here.
back porch, as the metal had all got saturated the porch, and it was all rusted and discolored with that part. So Tom had to redo the porch. Everybody made some job. One other deal. That was when he was living off of down from down, I forget the street, side street. He was there one day, and forget the politics of this, but Reagan was being flown up to his ranch. We had 3 helicopters escorting him. And he flew right over Tom's place, and Tom got very mad. He called up whoever he called up, I don't know. He said, "You better, I'm going to shoot this." I want you to stop flying this over our village. So maybe 10 minutes later, there's an officer going to go. And he ran and found a closet. And the person he was with at the time said, "Oh no, he's not here right now." So Tom was sort of got by with him. It's a nice tale.
And I just wanted, I don't know if you knew, this is Dick Dunlap, and Dick Dunlap is a jazz pianist, he is an artist, he has composed for Disney, he's a fabulous friend of Tom's for a long time. They created art and music together, and I love both he and his wife, we're all very close. And I also want to introduce Barbara Lackner, and Peter Lackner. And Barbara has been a choreographer for a long time. She's beautiful at what she did. She worked for Ensemble Theater for many, many years. And her wonderful husband also was a drama professor, and they worked together, and they're a beautiful couple. And I love you, Barbara. I love you so much. But I'd like to bring up Alan Goulsey now. Alan played drums, and he worked with Doug, don't tell me now, Dragon. Tom was married to Carmen Dragon. Carmen was a harpist. They didn't stay married very long, but they had a beautiful daughter. And Alan played drums for Doug Dragon, who was the brother of Daryl Dragon, who was the captain, as in the captain in Tennille. So he's going to have a story, and then I'd like to bring up the next person is Bill Royer, and Bill, you're next.
Am I on?
You're on.
Oh my God. Pardon my attire. I came from another location, and this was the proper attire. It clearly isn't here, but I'm okay with it. You're okay with it. This also was the attire when I met Tom, which was quite a long time ago. It was a hangout that we called La Costa Beach Club. It was on the sand in Malibu. The club is still there, and Tom was a regular there. He was there every day along with my cousins, Doug, Daryl, and Dennis Dragon. Our family were all musicians, and I played drums. My cousin Dennis Dragon was surf punks. He played drums as well. Little different style than me, but anyway, we grew up together. Doug and Daryl and Dennis frequented La Costa Beach Club all the time. Tom McBride was one of the guys. He was always there. He then met their sisters, Carmen, and they later got married, and their daughter Kelly we're all part of the family. So I've known Tom since the early days, way back when. I don't even want to say the year because it dates me. I'm sorry, I'm 74, but anyway. But, you know, we know how to have fun. So I have some stories. I have a bunch of them, but there's 2 in particular I'd like to tell about Tom. I hope I don't bore you. La Costa Beach Club was there for the residents of Malibu who lived on the hill. They didn't have oceanfront property, but they were welcome at the club. It was a private club. And Tom, somehow through friends, although he didn't live on the hill across the street, he was always there. He was kind of like part of the family. My cousins Doug and Daryl were a little older, and they were just up-and-coming musicians at the time. So like most up-and-coming musicians, they all played clubs around in the local area. It, at one point, was Doug, Daryl, and Dennis as brothers. They had a great group, did some recording. That always happens with brothers, fell apart. I then later became I was a rival of Dennis's because we both played drums. I became Doug's drummer. So we played at a club called the Riptide. It was in Venice. It was near the old Pacific Ocean Park. And Doug met the other group that was playing there, was headed by Bruce Johnston of the Beach Boys. He's the Beach Boys now, he wasn't then. He was playing clubs, trying to get noticed. He was a great player, sang, did all this, but nothing was happening. So Bruce hung out at the La Costa Beach Club quite often, and we all knew him. We all played together, he, Eddie Carter, a bunch of people. We all ended up doing some tours with the Beach Boys and playing with them. So Bruce surfed. He was the only person in the Beach Boys at the time in 65 plus that actually surfed. But at the time when we knew him, he comes down to La Costa Beach Club. Now, La Costa Beach Club was not, the beach there really wasn't a surfing beach. So here comes Bruce with a surfboard. I'm thinking, it's kind of weird. And we're on the sand, and you know, people are just kind of doing what they do, some in the ocean, volleyball was big. And Bruce goes up to a few people and says, hey, I really need you to help me out. Will you verify that I have a board, I can surf, and I go in the ocean? And Tom was there at the time, and he looked at Doug and he looked at me like, what's wrong with Bruce? And so none of us were able to figure. He went around to a bunch of people. He went in the ocean. There were no waves. He got on the board and paddled out a little bit, came back. Tom said, I think I got it. He's auditioning for a big part. And we didn't know what he was talking about. And the next thing you know, in 65, Bruce goes with the Beach Boys. So what he did, Bruce had answered an ad in a musician's paper. It didn't say Beach Boys, but it said, looking for keyboardist, must be able to sing falsetto, must be able to this, must surf, must be an outdoors person, etc. So he got signed off on that, and Tom was the guy that nailed it. Kind of funny. The next one, my next story, is relatively funny. Me and Doug played at a club known as The Raft. It was on Pacific Coast Highway in Topanga Canyon. A lot of people came in that club. Topanga Canyon at the time was a big mecca for a lot of the groups of the 60s. They all came in and sat in. We had great times playing. Tom would come in occasionally, and he would just unannounced come in and sit in, and he played sax. Admittedly, Tom said he didn't always know what he was doing. He didn't always know what key he was playing in, but he would come in, and some of Doug's material, there were weird time signatures. It was a little outside. It was a little Emerson, Lake and Palmer-ish at the time, before Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Well, Tom came in, and Doug looked at him, and Tom is starting to play what he thought was a familiar sound, but he was playing in the wrong key. Well, fortunately, Doug, it was one of Doug's compositions. It was a little out there anyway, and Tom playing off key made the whole song just sound great because it fit. And Tom never got over that. He said, you know, I know how to play in the wrong key and make it fit. He always said that. So the story is, we would always hang out after the gig. And this one night, it was about, 3 in the morning. They'd close at 2. We would go inside. We knew the owner, Jim McDonald and John DeVito, rest in peace, both of them. And we would enjoy a little bit of the bubbly after hours. Not supposed to, but we did. And Tom was there with us. The doors were locked, and everyone, was a little. They were enjoying their alcohol, and everything was funny. One of the waitresses, a couple of waitresses were still there, and they were telling the stories. And although this isn't necessarily funny. They were telling stories about various restaurants they worked in and some of the unclean conditions in the kitchen and what would happen. And although, you know, it wasn't funny, we were so much that everything was funny. So this one waitress was talking a lot about the, I don't have my mask with me, but people sneezing in the wrong areas, in addition to customers, et cetera, and kitchen people. It was actually pretty gross, but you know, it's kind of a lighthearted thing. Well, it's 3 a.m. now, we realize we gotta go. So Tom gets up, excuses himself, he goes to the restroom. So he comes out, and what I didn't see at the time, he had washed his hands in some hot water, and his hand was kind of dripping wet. I didn't see that. This waitress who was telling the sneeze stories was sitting in a chair, and Tom walks up behind her and fakes it, and he takes his hand and flicks the hot water at the back of her. She was wearing a sleeveless top, at the back of her arms, and she just came unglued. She came out of the chair. She was screaming at him. How could you? I mean, it was, you had to be there. It was the funniest thing I ever saw. She later laughed hysterically about it, but that was Tom. Tom had a great sense of humor, anything for a joke, and sometimes the jokes were just meant for certain people. Other times he could place them at the right time. Some of it was dry, some of it was just always. You had to know Tom, and you knew what he was always looking at the funny side of things. So anyway, those are my two stories.
I didn't know his surfing job, and I didn't know about this until way later. But that's how I met Tom. We were interested in what it could do as far as computers go, because we didn't have that in school, as many of you are aware. And it was fun to get together with somebody who was like-minded like me and be like him, not knowing anything about computers and kind of leaning on each other, to teach each other. And that's how I know Tom. Short story.
Yay! Woo! Woo!
So when I first moved to California, when I first moved to Santa Barbara area, my brother Clay, who does mortgage loans for mobile homes, he told me about a place that was for sale in Carpinteria. And I went to look at it with a realtor named Jeff Oyen, and I ended up buying the place. And then the realtor said, well, you should probably talk to the manager because you have to get permission to buy these things before you buy them. And you got to be a lot older than you are. So I went and met Tom for the very first time, and he's like, okay, well, this isn't really going to work. You're not even anywhere near old enough. I go, well, can I just fix it up and sell it? He goes, yeah, sure. You know, easygoing guy. So he said, sure, you can sell it. So I fixed it up, and by the time I finished fixing it up, I was ready to put it on the market. And I know you guys will find this hard to believe. I'm a lovable guy, but I was actually served an eviction notice where I was living. It's a great story. I won't bore you with it. So I shared that with Tom, and he says, well, why don't you move into your place here until you find another place to live? I said, yeah, that would be great if I could do that. He said, well, you know, the way the mobile home rules work is the park has to have 80% occupancy of people over a certain age, and then it's up to the discretion of the park owners whether they want to have 100% over 55. So we had a little wiggle room, so I was able to move in for a few months. And that's how I first met him. And then years later, when I was old enough to live here, then I started my little thing where I would buy it and fix it up and sell it and move into another one. That's been going on for years. But you know, normally I go leave the park and I do a kitchen or bathroom remodel in a normal home. And at the end of the day, I would drive home, and I would always hope that Tom's car would be parked out in front. Because I knew if his car was out there, I'd have someone that would actually listen to my woes. So then I'd have a miserable day at work, and people would be yelling at me all day long, and that's understandable. That's not the kind of person people like to yell at. But he would always, lend an ear, tell me to keep up the good work. He used to be a carpenter. And apparently he was a very good carpenter, because when I told him my horror stories about construction, one of the ones that, he was just so happy to share this one with me. He was a carpenter in Hawaii. And he was relatively new to this one particular job site. It was a big complex. And they're putting in, the framing was done, they were putting in the big double doors. And the boss is like, okay, we got this storm of all storms are rolling into Hawaii, and we gotta get these doors up, and we gotta get them up quick, guys, so get to work. So they all get out there, and they're working, and they're all doing the best job that they can, because Tom, he wanted to do it, he had a guiding light that was to do what's right. He wasn't really wanting to he didn't want to do a half-assed job, he wanted to do what was right. So he put these doors in the unit, and at the end of the day, the boss is like, okay, who did what? And one guy goes, I got 8 in. And the other guy goes, oh, I got 9 in. He's like, Tom goes, I got 2 in. He goes, you're not gonna make it, kid. So they all went home, and that weekend, the biggest storm in 20 years, or whatever, rolled into Hawaii. Next Monday morning, everyone's back on the job, and the place is a disaster. It looks like a hurricane had been through, with the exception of 2 doors. His 2 doors were there. And he did the right thing. He took his time, he did it right. And I think he did it right with all of us.